It was a bitterly cold afternoon on February 25, 1957, when a young man walking through the brush along a quiet road in Philadelphia made a gruesome discovery. Hidden inside a large cardboard box, the kind once used to ship bassinets, was the lifeless body of a little boy. He couldn't have been older than 4 or 5 years old. His hair had been crudely cut. His small frame was undernourished, and his naked body was wrapped in a thin blanket. Whoever had left him there had made a desperate attempt to erase his identity. But instead, they had left behind one of the most haunting mysteries in American history. This boy would later be known as America's unknown child. The scene that shocked Philadelphia, the location where the boy was found, wasn't unusual for the time. The area was partly wooded, a dumping ground for discarded items. In fact, his discovery nearly didn't happen at all. The man who stumbled upon him was checking his muskrat traps, something common in rural outskirts of Philadelphia then. He debated whether to call the police, worried that his illegal traps might land him in trouble. But the sight of the boy was too disturbing to ignore. Soon, officers from the Philadelphia Police Department were on the scene. The box, the blanket, the boy, all were carefully documented. But as they stood in the cold, one thing became horrifyingly clear. No one knew who this child was, or why his short life had ended in such brutality. The boy had suffered multiple injuries. His body bore signs of abuse, small bruises, scars, and indications of neglect. His hair had been chopped unevenly, possibly after death, as if someone tried to disguise him. There were no clothes, no shoes, no personal items to provide a clue. Just a frail body, abandoned like trash. A city on edge. News of the discovery spread quickly across Philadelphia. The local press picked up the story almost immediately, splashing it across front pages with headlines that gripped the city's imagination. The public wanted answers. Who was this child? Where was his family? Who could commit such an act? In an effort rarely seen at the time, police distributed thousands of flyers showing the boy's face. His photograph was circulated across the state and even mailed with utility bills. Investigators were confident someone would recognize him. After all, how could a little boy simply vanish without anyone coming forward? But no one did. Day after day, the phone lines stayed eerily quiet. No distraught parent called. No relative came forward. For detectives, it was as if the boy had never existed. Clues without answers. Investigators were left clinging to the few physical pieces of evidence at the scene. The cardboard box. It once contained a J.C. Penney baby bassinet. Police traced the box to a shipment, but thousands had been sold in the region. Narrowing it down was impossible. The blanket. A cheap, flannel blanket wrapped around the child's body. It too was mass-produced, offering no unique trail. The haircut. The choppy haircut, with tufts of hair still clinging to the boy's skin, suggested it was cut hastily and very recently. Could it have been an attempt to disguise him? Or to remove evidence like lice? The body. Weighing just 30 pounds, the boy was severely undernourished. His body bore small scars, including one under the chin, one on the ankle, and another on the groin. The medical examiner noted that these could be from a medical procedure or from abuse. Each clue deepened the mystery rather than solved it. Investigators were both horrified and fascinated. The boy seemed suspended between two worlds. Someone cared enough to give him medical attention at some point, but he had clearly also suffered terrible neglect. A desperate search for identity. Over the following weeks, detectives poured countless hours into the investigation. They visited orphanages, hospitals, and schools, hoping to find a child who matched his description. Thousands of leads came in, but each one ended in disappointment. There was a haunting contradiction to this case. Children don't simply disappear without someone noticing. A parent, a guardian, a teacher, someone should have raised the alarm. And yet, no missing child reports matched. The boy seemed to exist in a void. The police even took the unusual step of displaying his body to the public in hopes of recognition. At the morgue, he was dressed in clothes and propped up for viewing. Thousands filed past, but not a single person could give him a name. The weight of the unknown. For the detectives, this was more than just another case. The image of the boy haunted them, Veteran officers later described it as the most emotionally devastating case of their careers. The idea that a child could be beaten, discarded, and forgotten by everyone, even his own family, was unbearable. The city began calling him the boy in the box, a title that stuck. But to the investigators, he was their boy, a child who deserved dignity, a child whose voice had been silenced far too soon. A mystery takes root. As weeks turned into months, frustration set in. The investigation was exhaustive and still no answers. The boy in the box became a case file that seemed unsolvable, a mystery destined to haunt Philadelphia. Yet even in those earliest days, something unusual was happening. This wasn't just another murder case. This was a puzzle that captured the imagination of an entire city, and later an entire nation. Amateur sleuths, journalists, and ordinary citizens all wanted to solve it. It would be the beginning of one of the longest-running cold cases in American history. And as the years passed, the boy in the box wouldn't just remain unsolved. It would become an obsession for generations of investigators and true crime followers alike. In the days after the grim discovery, the Philadelphia Police Department launched one of the most intense investigations in its history. They were convinced that identifying the boy would be the key to solving his murder. After all, in most homicide cases, once a victim is named, a circle of family, friends, and acquaintances comes into focus. But here, investigators faced something almost unheard of: a child with no name, no missing person report, and no one coming forward to claim him. From the very beginning, the investigation was a race against time and against silence. The autopsy, more questions than answers. The medical examiner, Dr. Joseph Spellman, performed a careful autopsy on the child. The findings painted a heartbreaking picture. Age and weight. The boy was estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old, but at just 30 pounds, he was severely underweight for his age. Malnutrition was evident, suggesting long-term neglect. Signs of abuse. His body bore multiple bruises, some fresh, others older. These were not the result of a single incident, but of repeated trauma over time. Medical scars. Small scars on his ankle and groin appeared to be from surgical procedures, possibly a circumcision and hernia repair. This was crucial. Someone had sought medical care for him in the past. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head. He had been struck hard enough to cause fatal injuries. The autopsy raised disturbing contradictions. On one hand, the scars showed that someone once cared enough to bring him to a hospital. On the other hand, the bruises and malnutrition revealed years of suffering. Who had this boy belonged to, and why would no one claim him? A city engulfed in mystery, Philadelphia was gripped by the story. The image of the child circulated everywhere, on posters, in newspapers, even on gas bills. Police went door to door across the city and suburbs, carrying his photograph, asking the same painful question: "Do you know this boy?" But time and again, the answer was no. Detectives received hundreds of tips, and while some sounded promising, none led to an identification. A barber thought he recognized the haircut. A neighbor swore she'd seen the boy playing in a nearby yard. A woman was convinced the boy had been one of her students. Each lead sent detectives chasing shadows. The orphanages and institutions. Investigators turned their attention to orphanages, foster homes, and juvenile institutions in the area. Surely a child of his age, malnourished and abused, might have come from such a place. Every record was checked, every file reviewed. But again, nothing matched. None of the institutions reported a missing child. None could account for the boy. If he had been in state custody, there should have been paperwork. The silence was deafening. The public steps in. As weeks stretched into months, the boy in the box became more than just a police case. It became a public obsession. Ordinary citizens began investigating on their own, searching for connections, examining every detail of the case. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran extensive coverage, keeping the case alive in headlines. Amateur sleuths wrote to police with theories, many of them bizarre or far-fetched. Some claimed to have psychic visions. Others were convinced the boy was part of an underground child trafficking ring. The case began to blur the line between fact and speculation, between hope and hysteria. Theories that went cold. One of the earliest theories involved a foster home located not far from the discovery site. Investigators believed the boy might have lived there, but despite extensive questioning, nothing concrete tied the home to him. Another theory suggested the boy came from a traveling carnival family. His lack of identity, poor nutrition, and transient lifestyle seemed to fit. But no carnival workers ever admitted to losing a child. Still, another lead pointed to out-of-state connections. Police shared the boy's photograph nationally, hoping someone outside Philadelphia might recognize him. Again, nothing. Every promising theory seemed to collapse under scrutiny. The emotional toll on detectives. For the detectives assigned to the case, the failure to identify the boy weighed heavily. Many of them described it as the most haunting investigation of their careers. It wasn't just about solving a crime. It was about giving dignity to a child who had been discarded like trash. Detective Joseph Kelly, who worked the case for years, later recalled staring at the boy's photograph countless times, hoping something new would jump out. For him and others, the boy in the box wasn't just another case file. He became their child, a constant reminder of injustice, a case that refused to die. By the end of 1957, the official investigation had stalled. Despite massive publicity, exhaustive legwork, and national attention, the boy remained nameless. His body was buried in a potter's field, marked only as unknown child. But the story didn't end there. Far from it. Even as the official trail went cold, the boy in the box lingered in the public imagination. Detectives refused to let go, amateur sleuths refused to stop digging, and journalists continued to ask questions. What should have become just another unsolved case instead grew into a legend of true crime, a riddle that begged to be solved. The weight of silence. The mystery of the boy in the box carried a unique kind of horror. It wasn't just the brutality of the murder. It wasn't just the secrecy. It was the silence. How could a child vanish without anyone caring enough to come forward? Where were the parents? Where were the relatives? The teachers, the doctors, the neighbors? Every time investigators looked at his small face, they were reminded that behind the silence, someone out there knew the truth. Someone had once fed him, clothed him, cared for him, and then, perhaps, had killed him. A cold case for the ages. By the close of the 1950s, the case was classified as cold. But unlike many cold cases, it never faded completely. Each decade would bring new theories, new investigators, and new technology, all promising to solve the riddle of the boy in the box. And yet, every breakthrough seemed to slip away, leaving more questions than answers. The boy in the box had become America's oldest cold case, a story that would haunt investigators, journalists, and true crime followers for more than 6 decades. But in those early years, no one could imagine just how long the case would last, or how many twists and dead ends lay ahead. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. By the early 1960s, the case of the boy in the box had already become one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in America. Detectives had canvassed neighborhoods, scoured institutions, traced the cardboard box, and published the boy's image everywhere. But still, no one came forward. With no solid leads, investigators turned to theories. Over the decades, some became widely circulated, others quietly dismissed, but each one pulled the case in a different direction. For every step forward, there seemed to be 2 steps back. And with each passing year, the boy in the box transformed from a simple homicide case into something larger. A puzzle that drew in not just detectives, but journalists, amateur sleuths, and even psychics. The foster home theory, one of the earliest and most persistent theories, centered on a foster home located just over a mile from where the boy's body was found. The home, run by a couple who took in foster children, immediately drew suspicion. The proximity to the dump site seemed too coincidental. Police investigated thoroughly. The children at the home were interviewed, the foster parents questioned, and records examined. Some detectives were convinced that the boy had lived there. Others believed the theory was fueled more by proximity than by evidence. Ultimately, no concrete connection could be established. No child from the foster home was missing, and no one recognized the boy. Still, the suspicion lingered. For years, amateur sleuths returned to this theory, convinced the answer lay hidden within the walls of that foster home. The traveling carnival theory. Another theory suggested that the boy came from a family of traveling carnival workers. The idea seemed plausible. Carnivals were transient, moving from town to town, and families who lived on the road often lacked stable housing, schooling, or medical records. The boy's malnutrition and lack of identification fit that lifestyle. Police canvassed carnival routes and questioned workers. But once again, no link was ever found. No carnival family admitted to losing a child, and no witnesses could place the boy with them. It was another promising theory that ultimately went nowhere. The psychic investigations. As the years dragged on, frustration grew, and into the void stepped the unusual. Psychics from across the country offered their services, claiming visions or supernatural insights into the boy's identity. One psychic led police to a house not far from the discovery site, insisting the boy had lived there. Detectives investigated, but found nothing. Another psychic claimed the boy had come from another state entirely. Again, no evidence supported it. Though investigators remained skeptical, the sheer desperation to solve the case meant they followed up on nearly every tip, psychic or otherwise. Each time, the result was the same: nothing. The Martha confession. Perhaps the most sensational theory of all came decades later. In the 1990s, when a woman identified only as Martha came forward with a shocking claim. Martha alleged that her abusive mother had purchased the boy, kept him in their home, and subjected him to horrific abuse. According to Martha, after the boy vomited in the bathtub one night, her mother snapped and killed him. She claimed she had been forced to help dispose of his body, placing him in the box and abandoning him in the woods. The story sent shockwaves through the investigation. Could this finally be the break everyone had been waiting for? Detectives looked into Martha's claims. They investigated her family history, her mother's background, and the details of her story. Some of the facts lined up. Martha's description of the boy's appearance, his malnourished state, even the box. But other parts of her account didn't hold up under scrutiny. There was no proof her family had ever had custody of the boy. Neighbors never recalled seeing him. And Martha's own mental health struggles raised questions about the reliability of her memory. In the end, investigators were divided. Some believed Martha's account could be true. Others dismissed it as a fabrication. Without evidence, the theory could never be proven. Theories from the public. Beyond official investigations, the public developed its own theories. Some believed the boy was a victim of child trafficking, sold and discarded when he became a burden. Others suggested he was an unwanted child from a wealthy family, hidden to avoid scandal. Still others speculated he had been institutionalized, his identity deliberately erased by authorities to cover up neglect. Each theory added to the legend, turning the boy in the box into a mystery that was as much about imagination as it was about fact. A case that refused to be solved. What made the case so maddening was the sheer absence of resolution. Each theory carried a grain of truth, yet none ever closed the case. The foster home was too close to ignore, but had no missing children. The carnival theory explained the transient lifestyle, but no families came forward. Martha's confession was haunting, but unverifiable. Public speculation kept the story alive, but only added noise. By the 1970s, the case file had grown massive, stuffed with reports, tips, and theories. But the boy's identity remained a void. The boy in the box becomes a legend. As time passed, the boy in the box became more than a case. He became a symbol of lost innocence, of unanswered questions, of a crime that refused to be forgotten. Amateur investigators formed groups dedicated to solving the mystery. True crime writers covered the case in books and magazines. Television specials aired, each one re-examining the evidence, hoping to spark recognition in someone, somewhere. Yet with every retelling, the same truth remained. The boy still had no name, the toll of false hope. For the detectives who had carried the case since the beginning, false leads were more than just frustrating. They were devastating. Each time a promising theory emerged, hope surged that the boy would finally be given justice. And each time, the hope collapsed, leaving only more questions. By now, many of the original investigators had retired, passed away, or moved on to other cases. But the boy in the box remained with them, a haunting memory they could never shake. The endless wait. By the close of the 20th century, the boy in the box had endured 4 decades of investigation without answers. He had gone from headline story to cold case file, from a child without a name to a legend whispered in the annals of true crime. And yet, even in the darkest years of dead ends, detectives refused to give up completely, because deep down, they believed the answer was there, waiting to be unlocked. And as technology advanced, a new era of investigation was about to begin. By the 1980s, the boy in the box had already lingered unsolved for more than 2 decades. Most cases that old quietly fade into obscurity, locked away in dusty filing cabinets, remembered only by the detectives who once worked them. But this case was different. Something about the nameless child, abandoned in a box like garbage, refused to let go. The boy in the box had become more than a crime. He was a symbol of unfinished justice. And though the leads had long gone cold, the case would not die. The detectives who wouldn't quit. Through the years, several investigators took the case personally, refusing to let it disappear. Among them was Detective Tom Augustine, who worked tirelessly in the 1990s and 2000s to re-examine every shred of evidence. Augustine and others believed that even after decades, the answer was out there. Someone knew the truth. And as technology advanced, so did their chances of finding it. They reopened the box, the blanket, the autopsy photos, every painful detail. They interviewed surviving family members of possible suspects, followed up on old theories, and resubmitted evidence to forensic labs. Every effort carried the same mission. We owe this boy a name, the public's role in keeping the case alive. Unlike most cold cases, the boy in the box never fully left the public eye. Books and documentaries. True crime writers published accounts of the case, each keeping the story alive for new audiences. Web sleuths. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, internet forums like Web Sleuths and Reddit began buzzing with speculation about the boy's identity. Amateur investigators dissected every photograph, every police report, every theory. Community vigil. In Philadelphia, locals often visited the boy's grave, leaving flowers, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes. They didn't know his name, but they called him America's unknown child. This public devotion created an unusual pressure. Police couldn't just let the case fade away. Too many people cared. Too many people demanded answers. The role of technology. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, forensic science was changing at lightning speed. DNA testing, once a novelty, became a powerful tool for solving crimes that had gone cold for decades. Detectives knew that the boy's body, carefully preserved in the morgue for months before burial, might still yield DNA. His remains were exhumed twice, first in 1998, then again in 2019. Both times, the hope was the same, that science could do what traditional detective work had not. The first exhumation produced DNA, but it was too degraded to be useful with the technology available at the time. By 2019, however, forensic genealogy had emerged, the same method that had famously caught the Golden State Killer. This was the breakthrough detectives had been waiting for. Forensic genealogy, a new hope. Forensic genealogy works by comparing crime scene DNA to publicly available databases of genetic material submitted by ordinary people researching their ancestry. By identifying distant relatives, genealogists can build out family trees that point investigators toward suspects, or, in this case, toward the victim's identity. The boy's DNA was sent to experts in this field. Piece by painstaking piece, a family tree began to emerge. For the first time in more than 60 years, investigators had a glimmer of hope that they could finally name the child. But even with modern tools, the process was not quick. Thousands of possible relatives had to be mapped, cross-checked, and investigated. Still, each connection brought detectives closer. Why the case endured. The boy in the box case survived because it embodied a paradox that haunted everyone who heard about it. How could a child simply vanish from the record of life? He was not just a murder victim, he was a child stripped of identity, denied even the basic recognition of a name. For investigators, that was intolerable. For the public, it was heartbreaking. Every generation rediscovered the story. Each time, the same outrage resurfaced. How has this case not been solved yet? And so the case endured, passed down from detective to detective, from generation to generation of true crime followers, until it became the oldest active cold case in Philadelphia history. A name within reach. By the late 2010s, investigators began to sense they were closer than ever. The genealogy reports showed patterns. Families with connections to Philadelphia were identified. Relatives were contacted, sometimes dozens at a time, each one offering a piece of the puzzle. Still, nothing was announced publicly. Detectives were cautious. They had lived through too many false hopes, too many dead ends. They refused to speak until they were certain. For the boy in the box, it had been more than 60 years of silence. But now, for the first time, the silence was cracking. A case that defined persistence. Other cold cases had been solved through luck, chance confessions, or sudden discoveries. But the boy in the box was different. His case was defined by relentless persistence. Detectives who refused to let him be forgotten. Journalists who refused to let the public lose interest. Communities who refused to stop asking questions. And finally, scientists who refused to accept the limits of the past. It was this unbroken chain of determination that carried the case across 6 decades. Without it, the boy in the box might still be lying nameless in the ground, his story lost. The final push. By 2021, investigators were quietly confident. Genealogy was pointing them closer and closer to an answer. The boy's family line was coming into focus. There were names, possibilities, relatives. All that was left was to confirm. After more than half a century of searching, the boy in the box was on the verge of being given back what had been stolen from him. His name. For over 65 years, the boy in the box had been nameless. A child discarded, an unsolved murder, a mystery that seemed destined to haunt Philadelphia forever. But in December 2022, that changed. After decades of dead ends, false leads, and heartbreaking frustration, investigators finally stood before cameras and announced the words the public had been waiting to hear. America's unknown child has a name. He is Joseph Augustus Zarelli. The announcement that shook the nation. At the press conference, Philadelphia Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw called the revelation a watershed moment. Standing alongside detectives, forensic genealogists, and scientists, she confirmed what many had thought impossible. DNA and forensic genealogy had given the boy back his identity. Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born on January 13, 1953, murdered sometime in 1957. A life cut tragically short at just 4 years old. The room was silent as his name was spoken aloud. For the first time, the boy was not just a mystery or a symbol. He was a child with a history, a birthday, a family. Who was Joseph Augustus Zarelli? Investigators revealed that Joseph was the son of Augustus J. Zarelli and an unnamed mother whose identity was initially withheld. He had siblings, though it is believed he may have been estranged from parts of his family. Joseph's life had been hidden in the shadows. Court records and interviews painted a picture of a troubled family history, one complicated by secrecy and fractured relationships. Many questions remained about who was caring for Joseph at the time of his death and how he ended up in that box. But for investigators, one truth stood above all others. Joseph was no longer forgotten. The mystery that still remains. Even with his identity revealed, the most critical question remains unanswered. Who killed Joseph Augustus Zarelli? Police have not named a suspect. Some investigators believe Joseph may have suffered at the hands of his parents or close relatives. Given the circumstances, others think his death may have involved neglect or abuse that spiraled into tragedy. But without new evidence or living witnesses, it may be impossible to prove. As Commissioner Outlaw admitted, this is the beginning of the next chapter in this investigation, not the end. The case is now classified as a homicide investigation with an identified victim but no known killer. The emotional weight of closure. For many who had followed the case for decades, the revelation of Joseph's name was emotional. Detectives wept at the press conference. Members of the public left flowers at his grave, finally able to call him by name. The headstone that once read America's unknown child was now linked to a real boy. Joseph was no longer a symbol, he was a son, a brother, a little boy whose short life had touched millions of strangers. Forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick, who worked on the case, described it simply, "This boy was never forgotten. Now he is remembered as Joseph." A legacy in forensics. The solving of the boy in the box case proved the incredible power of forensic genealogy. Once considered controversial, the method has now been credited with solving dozens of cases, from the Golden State Killer to unidentified Jane and John does across the U.S. Joseph's case stood as a reminder that no case is ever too old to solve. With persistence and evolving science, answers can emerge even from the shadows of history. His story also reinforced the need for public participation. The DNA databases used in genealogical investigations rely on ordinary people submitting their genetic information. In a sense, it was strangers who gave Joseph his name back. Why the case still resonates. The boy in the box became America's oldest cold case not only because of its tragic details, but because of what it symbolized: the vulnerability of children, the cruelty of abandonment, the desperation of a society trying to protect its most innocent. Joseph's story resonated across generations because it was not just about solving a murder. It was about restoring dignity to a forgotten child. Every detective who worked the case, every journalist who wrote about it, every member of the public who left flowers at his grave, all were united by a single mission: to make sure Joseph was not erased. A grave with a name. Today, visitors to Ivy Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia can visit Joseph's resting place. His headstone still honors him as America's unknown child. But now those who stand there know the truth. They can whisper his name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. The case may remain unsolved in terms of identifying his killer, but Joseph is no longer faceless. He is no longer nameless. He is no longer lost. And for many, that is justice of a different kind. The story that will never be forgotten. The boy in the box case has left an indelible mark on American true crime history. It is a story of tragedy, yes, but also of relentless determination. For more than 60 years, police, journalists, and ordinary citizens refused to let Joseph disappear into obscurity. His story ensures that when we talk about cold cases, about forensic breakthroughs, and about justice delayed, we will always remember the little boy who was finally given back his name. Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Born January 13, 1953. Died 1957. Remembered forever.